Chapter 10. "Don't even think about it," Patty Ann said from behind Maggie as she retied Peter's shoe in the upstairs hallway. That shoe was forever coming untied, what she would have given for his old ones. At least they'd stayed tied. "About what?" Maggie asked, turning and tying simultaneously. She was bent down on the ground, and with Patty Ann behind her, there was a distinct possibility of being kicked the rest of the way to the carpet. You look like a high school math teacher on her first day of school." Maggie's eyes widened in incomprehension. Why?" She looked down at herself as she stood. The turquoise and white striped shirt wasn't exactly horrible. Patty Ann walked around her slowly. No, this will never do. Do you not know the governor is going to be here along with some other very important people? We can't have you walking around as if you just stepped out of the Walmart parking lot." The jab hurt, even from Patty Ann. Maggie looked down at her attire once more. "It's not like I'm the guest of honor. No one's even going to see me." "You represent this family." Every word exploded like a bomb. "Never, ever take that for granted. The way you look reflects on their standing in society. It is not acceptable for you to go around looking like the help." "Hello, I am the help." "Pfft." Patty Ann held up her hand. She scrutinized Maggie carefully. "I hate to even ask this, but don't you have anything better? Anything?" The small list of clothing slid through her mind. "I have a pink top that's kind of silk-looking, but except this skirt, I don't really have anything to go with it." Patty Ann considered that. "What size do you wear?" 8. The word was at least 6 syllables long. Why? A moment of consideration, and the decision was made. "I'll be right back." The entrances were scripted to perfection. The Ayers first as hosts, the governor and his wife as honored guests, the Hendersons as parents of the bride-to-be, and then last but not least, the happy couple. His father had even sent the limo down the driveway to the guest house to get them. It seemed this side of ridiculous for them to actually travel outside the gate to a discreet turnaround and then come back. But when it was in the schedule, questions just got in the way. "Oh, look, here they are," Vivian called to the assembled guests when Keith and Dallas walked arm in arm into the lavishly decorated backyard. Applause broke out around them. The backyard looked like a garden had exploded. White and pink flowers were everywhere. Soft candles burned in various places, although the hot Texas sun was doing no bowing to its puny counterparts. As he stepped with Dallas into the sea of faces he hardly recognized, Keith smiled as if this was the only place in the world he'd ever wanted to be. Somehow, he hadn't seen this part when he'd asked her to marry him. Somehow, the thought of flashbulbs and formal greetings hadn't entered his mind. "Son, Keith," his father said, puffing himself out with pride. "May I introduce you to Governor Keyes?" "Governor." Keith shook the man's hand like an expert. "Mrs. Keyes, this is Dallas Henderson, my fiancé." The last word lodged in his throat, but with a push, he got it out. "It's so nice of you to come. We so appreciate it." From her post in the corner next to the outside wall, Maggie watched him. He was hard not to watch. Smoke-colored tailored pants, white shirt casually buttoned. He looked the part of the handsome billionaire heir. The problem was he didn't look at all like Keith. Dallas, on the other hand, looked like she belonged nowhere else. Something in Maggie had hoped that Dallas wasn't all that pretty, because at least then Keith's assessment that she was nice would have been balanced by the fact that she wasn't also beautiful. Well, that worked. No, Dallas wasn't pretty. She was gorgeous. Her dress, a white number that plunged deep and rose high, accentuated a figure that said it was made for that kind of dress. The light golden hair was pulled to the side in a loose ponytail that hung over her left shoulder, wisps of hair sliding off both sides. Worse, her necklace and earrings alone had to cost more than Maggie would make in her lifetime. Yes, Dallas Henderson was beautiful, and the fact that she was nice, too, completely torpedoed any outlandish hopes Maggie had managed to put together about her chances with Keith. Even though her stomach twisted in knots at the sight, she watched them, mingling and sipping champagne, his arm around Dallas as if it belonged nowhere else. Her attention returned to Peter and his sister, making sure they didn't go far. That wasn't too much of a problem because Peter seemed to be permanently attached to the silk pants Patty Ann had loaned her. They felt great, but they probably cost more than all her other purchases put together. Worse, it wasn't totally clear where they had come from. "Guard them with your life," was not what you wanted to hear when you'd be on the front lines with 2 children. So, with no better options, Maggie resorted to sitting on the little bench that had been added along with who knew how many other things to the backyard. It was like a completely different place. They'd even moved the playhouse, which must have taken more than a little effort. She sighed as she looked around. Here she was, in the midst of the Texas elite, and even though she was physically here, she was, for all intents and purposes, completely invisible. It hadn't taken Keith more than 5 minutes to locate Maggie. From the first second he caught sight of her over in the corner by the miniature yellow rose-covered trellis, he'd wanted nothing more than to find a way to break away from the stuffed shirts and thank her for her kindness the night before. However, he knew that wouldn't be possible tonight as much as he wanted it to be. Too many people were watching his every move. Besides, tonight was about showing off for his father and Dallas's family. He felt like a trophy on a shelf having been taken down for others to ooh and ah over. Still, his gaze betrayed him every so often and drifted where the rest of him wanted so badly to go. "Well, Dallas, I'm glad to see Keith found you back," Ike said with a big Texas grin as he ambled up to the happy couple. "Ike, I'm so glad you could come." She put her arms around him and leaned forward. Keith wondered how her dress stayed on. The top of it was held together with a couple of gold chains which plunged down the backless part of the dress to the waistline. When she pulled back, Keith held out his hand. "Ike?" "Keith." Warnings and an ultra-critical evaluation of the situation flowed through Ike's eyes and smile right into Keith, pulling guilt out in fistfuls. Then, with a real smile at Dallas, Ike raised his glass. "Congratulations, you two. I hope you will be very happy together." As Ike stepped away, Keith closed his eyes for the barest of moments. When he opened them again, his gaze snagged on the young lady with the white pants and modest pink blouse sitting in the corner of the yard with 2 little children. Her hair was pulled up in that way that let it cascade down her back, conservative, and yet not stuffy. Next to her sat Peter, and on her lap sat Isabella. She was playing with them, talking to them, just like she always did. If he could just go over. "I'd like a picture with a happy couple," the governor said to those standing around. "Philip?" The governor's photographer stepped up. The 2 couples smiled, and the picture was recorded for all of posterity. "Well, well, it's good to see you standing on your own power," Greg said an hour later as Keith stood at the tree, taking a breather from the socializing. He was about full up and overflowing on his small talk quotient for the year. Keith held out his hand to his friend. "You made it." "Yes, I did. Even more remarkably, you did." Greg shook Keith's hand. Then, sipping the champagne, he leaned on the tree next to Keith. "So, you made it to the airport looking all happy and chipper, I guess?" "No thanks to you." "Me?" Greg sounded genuinely surprised. "What did I do?" "Next time you call a cab, tell them which house is mine, if you don't mind." "I did." "No, you didn't. You sent them to the mansion. Big difference. Anger snapped into Keith. Thanks to you, my dad hasn't spoken to me all day. Greg shrugged that off. Hey now, that's not my fault. It was all I could do to convince you not to be a total idiot and try to drive home. Because of me, you're standing there in one piece. You should be thanking me. They stood in the silence of a skirmish neither wanted to continue at the moment. So, what's the story on Peter's new friend? Greg asked, lifting his chin toward Maggie and the children who were still in the corner, at the party, and yet not really visible. The new nanny. Keith took a sip of champagne to keep his heart from cracking in two. Does the new nanny have a name? Maggie Montgomery. The name slid through him, knifing into his heart with a complete understanding that whatever he wanted with her would never become his reality. He looked around at the party. No, his reality was about his father's money and his position in this life. Anything more substantial was a dream that would never be any more than that. Hello there. The tall, dark-haired, good-looking guy with the little wire-framed glasses said as he stood next to the bench where Maggie sat. Hi. Cute kids. Thanks. Somehow, she had thought spending the whole night in the corner alone could get no worse. She was wrong. They're the Ayer kids, right? That pulled Maggie's uneasiness to the surface. I'm sorry, who are you again? Oh, sorry. He sat down and pulled his dark blue jacket with him, which, to Maggie, was not an improvement. Greg Parker, I'm Keith's friend. He held out his hand to her. The name pulled up 1,000 emotions she was trying desperately to bury. Oh, it's nice to meet you, Greg, Keith's friend. Isabella was toddling around the bench, and just as she got to Maggie's leg, she reached out, but missed, landing on her bottom. Oops, baby girl. Try it again. Maggie lifted her to her feet as Greg's hand fell back to his jacket. Kiki, Isabella said, her eyes shining. Maggie's attention dropped to the little face she had grown to so love. Kiki? Is that Maggie? Kiki! Isabella pounded Maggie's knee with her hand. Greg smiled. You're good with her. It's my job. Yeah, Keith told me you're the new babysitter. Nanny. What's the difference? A babysitter goes home when the parents get back from wherever they were. A nanny, well... She snagged Isabella from escaping too far and swung her onto her lap. Come here, you. So, you don't get, time off or anything? He took a sip of champagne, although he never really took his gaze off of her. Nope, not so far. His face fell. Isn't that like slave labor? Don't they have to give you some time off? Maggie shrugged. I don't mind. What else do I have to do, right? Ms. Montgomery, Patty Ann said, stepping up beside them. From her outfit, any normal person would have assumed she was the bride's mother at a wedding. Ivory Chanel suit, upswept hair. It was a little much for a garden party. Yes, ma'am. Maggie stood, picking Isabella up with her. She felt Greg rise at her side, and she wondered about that. Mrs. Ayer is ready for the formal pictures to be taken, so the children are needed. Oh, of course. Maggie glanced back at Greg. Excuse me. She was there for the pictures, of that much Keith was 100% sure. What he was less sure of was where she had gone after the pictures. As the sun relinquished its hold on the party and the soft lights came up, Keith couldn't help but glance back at the empty corner. Frustration poured through him when even after minutes and minutes she didn't reappear there. He checked his watch and realized she must be putting Pete and Izzy down for the night. His gaze traveled up to Isabella's window, and sure enough, the soft light in her window was on. At that moment, he would have given everything he would ever own to ditch all of this and go up there to help her tuck the kids in. The light in the window faded to black, and he didn't even have to try to remember the soft prayers she would say as she bent over Peter's bed. You're not getting tired already now, are you? Dallas waltzed up and draped her arms over his shoulders. Just taking a breather. She leaned over to him and nuzzled his ear. Self-consciousness dropped over him. Hey, you're pressing your luck there. He ran his hand over her back. I haven't forgotten what you like, she said, pulling her bottom lip under her teeth. She looked back at the party. Do you think anyone would miss us? At that moment, Keith caught sight of his father across the grass, standing and talking to both the governor and to Mr. Henderson. His father's glance in Keith's direction froze his blood. There was resolve in his gaze and a smile of self-satisfaction underneath. His stance on the situation was clear. Marry her or else. Hey, you two, get a room, Greg said good-naturedly as he walked up to where they were huddled. Jealous? Dallas asked, smiling at Greg. Well, I wouldn't be if Keith here would hook me up with a nanny. Dallas tilted her head in curiosity. The nanny? What nanny? Greg lifted his chin to indicate the back corner, and Keith's heart did a nosedive. Somehow, that wasn't what he had expected. Maggie, I'd love to ask her out, but you know the Ayers, they are taskmasters. They're not so bad once you get to know them, Dallas said, turning her full wattage charm in Keith's direction. Yeah, well, tell that to whoever hasn't let Maggie off yet. How long's she been here anyway? Keith had to swallow to get the answer out. Couple of weeks. That got Dallas's attention. A couple of weeks? And she hasn't had any time off? Keith's shrug hurt for more reasons than he could name. Well, Greg, you leave it to me. Dallas laced her arm through Greg's and bent her head furtively. I'm sure they will take the advice of their future daughter-in-law. Besides, we owe you one for hooking us up. The least we could do is return the favor. Ugh. She had to go and remind Keith. The night he never wanted to remember, the one she would never let him forget. It was a dance at A&M which were always rowdy and way fun. Keith and Greg had gone to scope out the prospects for a night of fun, and Keith spotted Dallas almost instantly. She was a sophomore at the time, and he didn't know her from Eve. During a slow song, he'd finally gotten up the courage to ask her to dance. However, when he approached her to ask, she surveyed him like he was dirt personified. Stupidly, he had asked her anyway, and it was with no small amount of insinuated insult that she had turned him down, making a point to do it loudly in front of her friends. He hated remembering that moment. It always made his heart stop his breathing. But Greg, being the friend he always had been, assured Keith it was only because she didn't know who he was. So Greg took it upon himself to fix the situation, and fix it he did. By the time they left, Dallas was hanging on Keith's every word, and before the next 3 sunsets, they were a couple. Do you think she'll come back down tonight? Dallas asked, a little too into this whole setup thing than Keith would have liked. What, does she, have to put the kids in bed and stuff? That's generally in the job description, Keith said, hating how mean he sounded. Well, maybe we can't do anything tonight, Dallas said as she patted Greg's arm. But I'm here the whole week. I'm sure we can get something to work out. When the kids were in bed, prayers said and tucked in, Maggie went to her own room. She didn't turn the light on. They might see it from the party. Instead, she knelt down next to her bed as tears of letting go streamed down her face onto the little white flowers. Dear Lord, I know I never had a chance with Keith. I know that as well as you do. But please, I ask you, keep him safe. Help him to be happy with Dallas. Help them to have a long and happy life together because he deserves that much. The night wound down eventually. The governor and his wife left. The guests left. Even the Hendersons had to call it a night. Keith was running on empty. After the night before, the draining afternoon, and the overtaxing evening, He was about 10 seconds from curling up on one of the little benches and calling a stop time forever. "Well, we really should be going too," Dallas said as she laced her arm through his. "Are you staying at the guest house?" Vivian asked, and Keith wanted to throw up at the obviousness of the question. "Where else?" Dallas asked, as if she was thrilled with the house and everything about it. She shrugged to get closer to him. "Oh, and Mrs. Ayer, Keith and I were thinking about having a little party Monday evening. Nothing big, just a few close friends." This was news to Keith, so he perked up his ears lest he miss something important. "We invited Greg, and he wanted to bring a guest." Vivian's face asked the question as much as she did. "And the problem is?" "Well, it's who he wants to ask," Dallas said, and then she leaned in lest anyone happen to hear. "Maggie Montgomery." Vivian's eyebrows shot up. "The nanny?" Dallas smiled. "You know Greg, never one to shoot very high." The comment raked right over Keith's nerves. "But we were kind of hoping we could help him out. Do you think Maggie could have Monday night off?" Vivian smiled serenely. "I'm sure we could arrange that."
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
This has been Deep in the Heart, written by Staci Stallings. Narrated by Becky Dowdy of Brave Hearts Audiobook Productions. Copyright 2010 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.